you might be flagging a little bit here, so I've got a few slides to sort of, without too many numbers on them anyway, so, and I just kind of want to sort of throw a few bit more kind of slightly conceptual kind of perspectives at you in terms of the big data agenda. Look, obviously there's a huge, we've all stopped arguing about what big data is. It's all a bit boring now, isn't it? But there's a big data, a significant discussion about data within business. It's a huge user of data for obvious reasons. But my argument is that it's a little bit basic at the moment, and actually quite a lot more can be done, should be done, but you know what, it's actually quite a complicated process and complicated conceptual process, because fundamentally what I'm coming from is about understanding humans. I'm looking at this from a marketing perspective. So there's a bunch of humans looking at data to understand humans. Now things start getting messy in that process. And so in my mind it's important to step back from this a little bit and just say, look, what are some of the kind of issues here, a bit more philosophically, conceptually, that we need to address in the way in which we go about exploring some of these issues. So, right, now, so where are we now? What's the current environment? I think we're all very aware that there is a huge sort of ecosystem at work to gather data about the minutiae of our lives. You Google something, you go to a website, we all know that this is all picked up. It's aggregated by enormously successful organisations like Axiom, who then sell that to retailers and who in many others, and there's a huge market with about all of us and about an extraordinary breadth and depth of what exactly we've been up to, for long periods of time. So, you'd think with all that data, you'd really think with all that data that we'd be in a pretty good position now, where organisations are really able to leverage the sort of full extent of that to actually get a huge amount of money and extract it from our particular wallets. So, the most significant manifestation of this, of course, is online advertising, and this, in my mind, is probably one of the key ways in which organisations are actually using data they hold about us. Programmatic advertising, as it's called. So, with all that, click-through rates of advertising, not looking too good, is it? That's the kind of, that's the sort of, core, basic number which you come up with. So, but that's the basic number. That's really without having all this information sitting underneath us. So that's the kind of historical number. So actually, if you supercharge this with all this information about our behaviours, then what do you get? Problem, surely. Where is this going? What's going on here? And I suppose a contrarian might argue, look, where is the big data? Where's the whole big data enterprise going? Is it, how well is it succeeding? There's a huge number of studies which are saying, the upshot of all this is not really doing it for us. We're making huge investments, but we're not really seeing the return on that investment. Now, I would say that quite a few of these are organisations which are commissioning studies which have an interest in flogging more technology to collect more data on us. But they're slightly kind of digging their own grave in a sense by raising this, because it's a bit of a gamble, isn't it? You will do better if you spend more money on more technology to gather more of this stuff. But my question is really just how much are you actually going to do with this? What are you actually going to do with this data? And this is just looking on the kind of social media this morning. There's somebody from Intel, one of the infrastructure providers for this whole shebang, who is saying actually business's dirty little secret is that they don't actually know what to do with the data. And you know what? In my experience, talking to organisations about the data, they say, look, we've got this great data assets, but we don't really know what to do with it. And we spent all this money, and what do we do with it? How do we get it? And so on. So change is in the air for sure, and there's some interesting stuff going on. And I don't think this is new news. You know, we're kind of going from a situation where it's kind of behaviours, which we're starting to track. You know, who you are, where you are, what you're doing. And look, let's not underplay this. Look, I'm being a little bit facetious to make a point. You know, that the kind of the basic kind of opportunities that presents are being reaped. I think I would just question how much value there is, has been reaped, and how much value there is left. But I think where we're moving now is from a kind of personalisation based on that to personalisation based on our inner lives. You know, what are you? It's not who you are. It's what you like. It's not where you are now. It's where you're going. It's not what you're doing. It's why you're doing it. That's the new frontier. That's the new opportunity. And for me, as a market researcher, kind of, and you know, a psychology background, it's whoa. This is really exciting. This is really interesting. Now the kind of conversation is hotting up a little bit. And you know, of course, we've got a huge number of this idea that we're collecting loads of data. And as we all know, the reason it's collected isn't necessarily the reason which we're using it for. So actually, we can start from things like Twitter, we get sentiment, Facebook, we can understand relationships, we can understand habits, we can understand desires, but also just from the information, from the transactional data that any organisation holds about your behaviours. And increasingly, we're getting more and more of that information as we move more from a kind of pure transactions, straight into services and services relationships. Think Nespresso. I used to just go and buy a coffee and that was it. Now actually with Nespresso, they know all sorts about me because I'm buying this then and I'm engaging with their emails in this way. They can start inferring all sorts of information about my personality, my characteristics, my kind of inner life, as it were, that perhaps previously was not possible. So I like this sort of Johari window. I know it's a bit sort of 70s, but I'm kind of trying to sort of make it, bring it back to life a little bit. And this is typically used in sort of team building exercises where it's actually, what do you think about yourself and what do other people think about yourself? So it's a kind of, what's known to us, what's not known to us, what's known to others, and what's not known to others. And essentially, I think where we're moving to is the stuff which is known to us is starting to shift. It's kind of staying the same, I should say. The stuff that's known to others, the stuff that about us and about our inner lives, which previously we might know, but others might not know. Well, actually, you know what? Tesco's knows that about you now. Tesco's knows if you're an extrovert or an introvert, if you're conscientious or if you're impulsive, if you're, now, they may be they might not necessarily use that, they may not necessarily leverage it, they don't know how to use it, how to leverage it and so on. They may be just, I'm not sure if Tesco's themselves know that, but as an example, that is the environment in which we're increasingly moving. And there's a suggested that try this stuff out. Go on to crystalknows, which is a great, really entertaining app, which basically sort of goes around the web looking for evidence of your sort of behaviours, and then deriving information about your personality from that. So I've got a lovely profile here. I'm detail-oriented, sceptical of change, like a clear set of expectations and a step-by-step plan before making a decision. So, just afterwards, if you're going to speak to me, speak with a clear, calm, steady tone. Don't appear over-aggressive and don't stick to the big picture. So just a bit, just a tip there if you want to, if you've got a question afterwards. So, if you go onto IBM Watson, there's a personality insights. Now, you stick in 3,500 words or daily up to 6,000 words of your in order to be able to sort of work out your personality. So I'm this kind of exciting kind of guy who's inner-directed, sceptical, and can be perceived as inconsiderate. You're getting a picture of me now, right? Now, is this, what is this? Is this modern-day horoscopes, or is there something in it? And I think this is the kind of the big question. There's certainly a lot of kind of literature coming into, well, I wouldn't say a lot, but we're starting to see, movement of literature in this area. Have a look at persuasion profiling, have a look at All You Can Pay. There's a book about to come out which kind of looks as if it's on this territory. It's called A Smarter Screen. These are all kind of publications which kind of explore this kind of area, and I think are kind of interesting as statisticians to kind of understand where the opportunities start to be moving. And of course, you know what? The academics are getting really, really excited about this, and I keep saying to my sort of, market research colleagues, come on, look, there's a great world out there. We've got Duncan Watts saying that, this is a special time in the history of social science. We've got Scott Golder, who's kind of well known in this area, saying, big data is a high-powered lens into the details of human behaviour and social interaction. The promise is massive. There's a great opportunity. It's really exciting times. But obviously, I'm going to put a but in this, because I think there is a danger of that we just miss this. That we kind of just think, okay, let's all we need to do is apply some stats to this. Let's do some machine learning, get the answers. That'll be, and it's just kind of straightforward endeavour. And I'll go back and with all due difference to, there's a place for that, but it kind of needs to be, in my mind, it needs to be in the context of a bigger picture. And I go back to the point about this is humans exploring humans. It's a bit complicated. And I say, number one, analytics is a human endeavour. There's the bane of everybody's life, I guess, who's publishing stuff, is Johnny Ioannidis. And I'm sure we've all heard of this, of him, and his study a few years ago, where he said most published research findings are false. And Nate Silver had made the same point about sort of false positives. And in the era of big data, you know what, it's kind of, we all know that the more data you've got, the easier it is to get a statistically significant finding. And actually, Ioannidis did an article in The Guardian the other day saying that this is more likely to happen in fields where they're chasing subtle, complex phenomenon, where there's more noise, where there's room for subjective choices to be designing and running experiments and collecting the data. Sounds very much like marketing science to me. So, it sounds exactly like the field we're in, and it's a kind of, so there's lots of kind of, subtleties and complexities around this. To say, human endeavour, we're all susceptible to bias. I don't know, have you ever seen this picture before? And I don't know how well you can see it, but so this is a radiogram, I think is the expression, a cross-section of somebody's stomach. This was shown to radiographers, and they say, guys, can you see anything unusual there? I don't know if you can. Anyone can see anything odd with that? I don't know how good the image is there, but yeah, I can see that. No? Sorry? Just there.
Oh, face and
yeah. So there's a right just there. I don't know if you can see it. Maybe it's a bit too small, but but it's a gorilla. There's a gorilla there. Okay. so it may now trust me, if you come up and have a look at it afterwards, or if you see the slides, you'll see it, and you'll see it straight away. And so it may be an unfair test for doing this on you because of the sort of you're back a bit from the screen, and you probably all need specs. But the radiographers didn't see the gorilla because they're used to looking for certain things, and you don't expect to see a gorilla there, so you don't find the gorilla. There's another really nice study about actually the subject's not very nice. It's about the bombing in World War II, and about the way in which the sort of bombs were in World War II. There was obviously a huge amount of discussion about the strategy, the German strategy for bombing, and and the kind of were some areas of London more dangerous than others, and of course we're looking for patterns. It's that we look for patterns in the data all the time, and of course people had these great theories about sort of what was going on and why how they were all being clustered and so on. The reality was that actually looking at it afterwards, subjecting it to sort of some calmer scrutiny, it was pretty random. There weren't actually any kind of real, there's no real rationale sitting behind it. So so a couple of examples of that, I would say, look, there's a human side to the analytics process, what we choose to look at, what we choose to edit, what is an outlier, and so on and so forth. We're all familiar with this, but sometimes we forget it, and sometimes we think, actually, this is an objective process. It ain't. Our hands, our fingerprints as humans are all over this stuff. There's a really nice study in the Harvard Business Review, which is looking at where analysts were given 29 different teams of analysts were given data about soccer refs and their propensity to give red cards based on skin colour for footballers. And each team was given an identical data set, but they came up with fundamentally different conclusions. And these are smart people. You know, this is a room like this, you know, of people kind of, you know, looking at the data, but we all choose to look at different stuff. We choose different statistical models. We choose different variables to play with. So, you know, it's no surprise we come up with different conclusions. And the other thing I kind of say is, look, Silicon Valley has a great kind of is really behind the whole Ray Kurzweil idea of, you know, the singularity, that, you know, actually that kind of we are, you know, we're fundamentally predictable. And and many of you may be aware of Chris Anderson a few years ago was saying that, you know, he was the ex-editor of Wired, quite an iconoclastic kind of figure, and he was saying, you know what, this is the end of theory. We don't need theory anymore. This is the kind of, you know, this is all we need to do is to look at correlations in the data. And kind of, you know, there's a certain sort of, you know, I've got a certain sympathy to that in a sense, you know, but actually, you know, there's still a very, I think, a very strong implicit assumption that's what we need to do. You know, certainly in the kind of conversations that are going on in business marketing circles, you know what, we don't really need to understand what's going on. All we need to understand is, you know, how do we predict certain outcomes? We don't need to understand the content of why that is the case. But, you know, my view is that, you know what, we've all got models, conceptual models in our heads of how we work and what it is to be human. And I think that we're increasingly operating within a particular model which is perpetuated by technology companies. You know, no necessarily bad thing about that, but it is a particular model of how we are as humans. And that model influences the way we do analytics, and therefore influences the kind of outcomes we get. And I'd go back to the kind of point that Nate Silver gives, and I think it's a much quoted, I think it's a really good point, is that the numbers having no way of speaking for themselves, and that we imbue these numbers with meaning. So, a tangible example of that, Fitbits. How many people have got a Fitbit and no longer use it? I won't embarrass you. Okay, you got one over here. But, the work. You know, I've done a little bit of survey work on it. Great market for second-hand Fitbits on eBay, because you know what? You know, this idea that you can throw some technology at something, because we've got this idea of how humans operate, that actually, you know, that we're essentially kind of data-oriented beings, and we'll fit within this kind of data ecosystem, doesn't work. We need better, more complex, more real models of what it is to be human. And I think I like this guy, David Walker, Campaign for Social Science. Don't know anything about him, but I like this point he made. You know, better grasp. If we don't get a better grasp of people and their motives, technological advances may fail to realise their potential and may be frustrated or blocked. And I think it's a damn good point, and I think there is the further point which I sort of build on that, there's a philosopher called Larry Loudon, and who these guys are kind of effectively kind of quoting to say, you know what, an awful lot of the way in which we progress ain't really through empirical analytics. It isn't always just, you know, we can't necessarily stick it all into a machine and get some kind of, you know, output on the back of that. We have to engage in that kind of conceptual development, in that kind of discussion about theory, that discussion about models, in order for our disciplines to work within. It has to be part of the discussion. So, you know, one thing which I keep throwing at people, and I know, you know, this is the kind of, sixth form kind of, you know, philosophy example, but you know what, I like it. It's Mary's room. I don't know if people have come across this before, but you know, let's say you know, Mary's a scientist who's got to research the neurophysiology of vision from a black and white room via a black and white monitor. So for argument's sake, Mary has just seen a black and white world and that's it. Okay. You know, what happens when she's released from a black and white room or given a colour television monitor? Will she learn anything or not? Now, that is fundamentally the kind of, you know, there's an essence of what it is to be human experience, you know, and that becomes part of that discussion. You know, is it actually that we can then, you know, we've tracked, she knows everything there is to know about vision. She's kind of done the data analytics, she's got huge amounts of information, she's got all the stuff, she's got all the stats, but actually when she sees colour for the first time, is that something qualitatively different? Now I would argue yes, I would argue, yeah, there's something about human experience there which is qualitatively different. And I just use that just to kind of, I recognise it's a bit of a bomb I'm just throwing in at the last minute just to confuse the hell out of everybody. But in a sense, what I'm trying to do there is just to say, look, we do need to have a kind of more complex, more rich, more colourful understanding of what it is to be human than some of the models which we're currently using to guide our data analytics, because I think they're a bit narrow. I think they're a little bit sort of reductionist. I don't really think they do us as humans justice. And if that's the case, we're going to see the big data train just continuing to derail as far as I'm concerned. I think I could talk about data patterns, about ethics, but Pat's given me the dark look. But check out dark patterns, was all I'll say. And all I'll say is, look, I think, what I would take from this, as practitioners in this stuff, we've got to be reflexive. We've got to understand what we ourselves are doing, how we're thinking about things, what is it about ourselves that's driving our analytics. Analysis doesn't sit in isolation. It's part of a bigger political and philosophical and ethical debate. So, in a sense, I've got no grand conclusions. All it is just a kind of a manifesto to say, you know what, the conversation needs to move on, it needs to be bigger, and it needs to be more ambitious. Thank you.
Time for one or two questions. One question.
I'm not sure if it's a question or observation, but I mean, you're arguing for more complex models, but there's a lot of lessons from statistics and machine learning about how adding complexity can actually harm your ability to predict. So how do you sort of reconcile that?
I'm not totally convinced about our ability to predict full stop, would be my slightly heretical kind of assertion. I'm just not convinced that humans are necessarily that predictable. And I think there's a conversation to be had about what can we predict and what can we not predict. I agree with you. I do think there's a certain level of complexity which just doesn't help. I don't know. I think that's part of a wider conversation which kind of needs to be had. Not sure if I'm really answering your question, but I think it's an interesting observation. So,
time for one more. Here we go.
It's more of an observation, really, and I have to agree with you. I think as statisticians we get awfully excited about data and the fact that there's more bigger data coming in, it has to be better. And from what you're saying, I don't think it is. Or rather, it needs careful use and scrutiny, and it's not the only answer.
Yeah, I just think that we shouldn't be scared of getting into a bit more of a philosophical discussion about some of this stuff, because if we don't, we end up straying down paths where we're just not delivering. It's my view.
Okay, I think with that we're just about out of time. So can I just thank Colin, Jane and Maria once again for a fantastic session.